And welcome, everyone. This is the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and we have a great show lined up for you today. Joining me this week again is my good friend Pongo, all the way up from Canada. How are you doing, Pongo?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Also joining us this week is my other good friend, the legendary man himself, the crazy lab man, Cobblepott. Cobble, how you doing?
Doing well. Good to be here.
Good. So last week we did our Strixhaven set review, and this week we're going to be doing our Commander 21 or Strixhaven Commander, whatever you want to call it. I believe it's officially Commander 21 set review. So we're going to be going over the cards in Commander 21 that we think are either going to have an impact on the cEDH metagame or are going to, or at least worth discussing to some extent. But before we get into that, I just want to thank you all for joining us this week. If you like this episode or any of our other episodes, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. If you want access to our Discord server as well as some extra content, make sure to head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/themindsculptors or check out the link in the description. We also have a TCG player affiliate link, so you can click that link down there, and if you're going to be buying some Strixhaven cards that we've talked about last week or this week, you can buy those cards with that link, and that will help out the show as well. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into things here. In our first card is, I believe this is the front-facing command. No, it's not. It's one of the commanders that comes with, one of the hidden commanders that comes with the Prismari. What's the Prismari deck called? I forget the names. I should probably have that up. But anyway, it comes in the red-blue Not Izzet deck. And this is Veyran, Voice of Duality. It's the legendary Ifrit Wizard that costs 1 blue and a red. It's a 2/2 with Magecraft that says whenever you cast or copy an instant sorcery spell, Veyran, Voice of Duality gets +1/+1 until end of turn. The second part of that, it has another ability on it that says if you casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So we talked a lot about this deck last week. We're going to talk about it right here now. Cobblepott, this is definitely going in Kark and Sakashima, right?
Oh, most certainly. Again, this is, I think whenever a set comes out, we're now kind of at this point where you look at blue cards and you look at red cards and you're like, yeah, this is one of the Kark and Sakashima cards. The first ability, the actual Magecraft ability on the card is really not all that important because it's just gonna, beef up the creature. It'll trigger twice every time you cast a spell, but really the thing that you're caring about here is doubling up on the triggered abilities of things when you cast or copy. For most permanents that are in print, it's the casting trigger that a lot of things are going to respond to. So if you're looking at like Jeskai Ascendancy or 1,000 Year Storm or Aetherflux Reservoir or Krark, those are all permanents that are looking for things they're going to trigger when you cast a spell. Right. Other permanents that have just recently been printed, things like the Archmage Emeritus and the red one that creates treasure tokens. I forget what off the top of my head. I forget what it's called. Storm Kiln
Artist.
Yes,
that's what it is.
Right. Those, because they have Magecraft, they will also double trigger on copies as well. So, but for the most part, the things that we're really looking at are things like Jeskai Ascendancy and Aetherflux Reservoir. So, for the most part, this is just going to be an extra Krark trigger, and I think that's, as far as the cEDH metagame, the thing that you're going to see most often. We may wind up, like I was saying, in the previous set review, somebody may try to put something together that's doing, kind of traditional Storm with cards that actually have the word Storm on them, just to make try to take advantage of all the magecraft that we're seeing and see if that actually is sufficiently good to make a go of it. I haven't seen any of that stuff yet, but I wouldn't count it out for sure, just because it has the ceiling is very high. It's just, how often are people going to be able to make that ceiling? That remains to be seen. But I think that it's a for sure, extra card that we know is going to go into Krark, and doubling up on your Krark triggers. It's you can think of it like an extra Krark, that's in the deck plus upside if you're playing any of those other types of cards that are also triggering off of casting spells.
Yeah, it's a really interesting card, and it's very fun to see kind of Manual Storm look like it's at least maybe attainable in cEDH right now. Right. There's at least like something there where you can get wheels spinning, right? Like,
for sure. I've kind of for a long time monkeyed around with 5-color Jeskai Ascendancy, just kind of, in the background, never actually really playing it. But, being able to get double untaps and double loots with, every spell that you're casting. It seems like there's some potential there, but again, that's how consistent that's going to be, and just
remains to be seen.
Exactly.
Right.
Pongo, what do you think?
I think she's an interesting card. I don't think she quite gets there on her own merits. So sort of like at the helm of her own deck, helming her own deck, I should say. But certainly it's a powerful effect. If we look at it almost as like a Panharmonicon, in the type of deck that would kind of build around that sort of effect. Obviously at 3 mana as well, and with some other relevant text. It's not quite as insane as Panharmonicon, so like I don't take that comparison too literally,
too deeply.
Yeah, but I certainly think that she can be a role player in a certain deck. Probably, she, like what Cobblepott was saying with Jeskai Ascendancy, probably you don't want to be playing her as the commander, so that you can probably profit off of more powerful interactions that are possibly outside of her color identity.
Most definitely.
Yeah. Well, moving on to the next card on our list, we've got where is it? There it is. Archaeomancer's Map, which is an artifact that costs 2 colorless.
What about Osgir? Let's do Osgir.
Wait, did I jump over that?
I think you did.
Oh no, I did. I scrolled too fast.
Look at you go.
Excuse me. Next card on the list. Spoilers. For those of you who were waiting for who wanted the surprise. The next card on our list is Osgir the Reconstructor, which is a legendary creature who's a 4/4 that costs 2 colorless, a red, and a white. His abilities, he has Vigilance, and he has an ability that costs 1 colorless, sacrifice an artifact. Target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Also has a second ability that is an X, tap ability, and you also have to exile an artifact card with mana value X from your graveyard, and then you create 2 tokens that are copies of the exiled card, and you can only activate as a sorcery. So, Pongo, there's some interesting things. I saw a lot of people brewing this. What is the real kind of interesting thing that you can do with this right now?
Yeah, so this deck has a infinite combo or game-winning combo that you can pull off using Mirror of Fate and Ugin's Nexus. It's a surprisingly complex combo, so I won't get into the details. If we look at the actual primer, one of the primers for this deck, it lists 28 steps. And you have to start looping it at step 17 once you get to step 28. So, possibly even more to explain. Harder to even break down than perhaps like a Gitrog type combo.
That's impressive.
Yeah. So essentially what you can do is, you're essentially able to loop artifact effects such that you can kind of, do whatever you want, take as many turns as you want using Ugin's Nexus. Mirror of Fate notably lets you get stuff back from exile. So Osgir obviously exile stuff, and then you create tokens that are copies, and then what you can do is essentially create sort of like a sort of doomsday style situation where you're just kind of like looping certain pieces repeatedly, and yeah, I think at that point it's like kind of trivial to win. So when we're talking about that combo kind of has some major limitations, insofar as you need to have your 4-drop in play. He can't be summoning sick, and you also need to spend 7 mana to get going, and you also need to have Ugin's Nexus and Mirror of Fate in the graveyard. So, the requirements are relatively steep. I think that all of those requirements kind of keeps him out of being potentially as straightforwardly competitive as like some of the most recent Boros, or I should say red-white options that we've had. Things like Cole, things like Winota, I think, whose game plans are potentially a little bit easier to pull off in the early game, like quickly. I like the card insofar as it's like new space for red-white commanders to be pushed into. He does a cool thing. I just don't think he quite makes it in terms of power level. It's cool to see that we're getting lots of red-white commanders that are doing unique and powerful things. The biggest issue for me has not been red-white commanders, because actually, like I mentioned, we've got Cole, we've got Winota, and Osgir is another option. We've gotten a reasonable amount of options, actually. The issue is like the supporting cast, right? Like the rest of the cards in the deck. Red cards have gotten a lot stronger. White cards have lagged behind a great deal. But as powerful as the most powerful red cards are, red and white are not like deep colors, like blue is, like green is, like black is. So it tends to be that if you're building around both of those colors at the same time, your deck is kind of limited in a lot of respects. And so, yeah, we need to see just kind of new powerful staples, particularly in white, I think, before red-white really, takes off.
Yeah.
Right. Red-white is known for having lower relative card quality than really the rest of the color pie in general. The thing that I think constrains Osgir the most is not only are you limited by the kind of the lack of depth that Boros has available to it, but you have to get yourself into a more novel board state than something like Winota, which just play Winota and creatures and attack. That's not a non-trivial kind of board state to assemble. And yes, red does have some strong, I would say maybe mill and rummaging kind of capabilities, but being precise about being able to get very specific things in entombing kind of effects. You got Gamble is a really poor man's entomb. So
yeah, Goblin Engineer exists too, but
right. But I don't know if Goblin Engineer even go and get something that's more than 3.
Yeah, it can entomb any artifact. It just can't return any artifact into play.
Got it.
Yeah,
okay. But still, it's like that's it's a more novel board state that you need to assemble, and it's more fragile.
Right.
So like with something like Winota, if somebody, exiles one of your hate bears, it's like, okay, well, that's a shame, but I'm going to keep on moving. In the case of Osgir, if someone's got, a rest in peace when, your Mirror of Fate is in the graveyard or something, then, well, your game is just over. There's not, a lot of plan Bs that are, available to you at least, kind of immediately in the first revision of some of these lists. So it's pretty fragile. But I mean, that said, if somebody 6 months ago said, well, yeah, we're going to be playing Boros Doomsday in, in this coming year, I would have been pretty skeptical. So, I mean, it's a cool development, and I'm interested to see the space get explored. It's just that I don't know if Boros is the going to have the support that it needs to pull it off.
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to say is that this is like, if there was any deck in this format that wanted Fervent Mastery, like this is that deck.
Right.
For sure. But I think for me, so my issue with Osgir is that Osgir is not as powerful a value engine as something like Winota. And I think that, Winota also lends herself very, very strongly towards assembling, like Kiki type combos. So her combos in many respects are also kind of supported by her ability and are quite straightforward. I think he's also not as straightforward of a combo engine as something like Cole, where Cole, gets a lot of functional redundancy for his pieces, and gets a lot of tutors for like specifically like Skull Clamp and like the artifact side. So like, while you might occasionally struggle, like for example, with being able to tutor like a cost reducer for the equip costs, you're playing a high redundancy of that effect such that like it kind of offsets the limited tutoring capacity in red and white. And then like tutoring equipment is not really an issue. So like Cole ends up just being a much more straightforward and much more efficient like combo option. So Osgir kind of suffers by he suffers from not being as good at combo as Cole and not being quite as good at grindy stacks as Winota, where Winota also kind of has the potential to, just, even if like she doesn't combo, like even if she's not a combo piece herself, she at least like digs you really deep and really quick toward your combo. So yeah,
Osgir's just not. He's not creating advantage. He's not created card advantage. I mean, you could say that it's advantage because he's doubling up on, but he's not creating advantage in the sense that you are seeing more cards.
Right. Yeah, he's just essentially doubling up on your stacks artifacts and the limited amount of value artifacts you can play. Right.
It'll be interesting. I didn't know there was a primer for this out there. I kind of want to
there's
it up and read the.
There are variations. All the variations I've seen use Mirror of Fate, but there's some that use Ugin's Nexus. There's some that just try to burn people out by assembling a combo that can win on the spot. I mean, there's interesting things people are trying, and It's probably not going to be good enough to get there in the metagame, but it's good for people to explore this kind of stuff because this is what causes the metagame to evolve, and it makes things more interesting, and it makes Boros a better place to be.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly more compelling than things that we have seen in the past. And it's exciting to see the color combination really get a lot of love, I feel like, in the last year. So it'll be interesting. But speaking of some white love, maybe this isn't white love per se, but it's we spoiled this earlier. Archaeomancer's Map. It's an artifact that costs two colorless and a white. That says when ETBs, search your library for up to 2 basic plains cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. Whenever land, and its second ability is whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, the player controls more lands than you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So, Cobblepott, you kind of scoffed a little bit when I when I said White Love. So tell us, what's your opinion of this card?
So the thing that people are immediately going to compare it to is Burgeoning. And Burgeoning is a 1 mana enchantment in green that does not have the rider that says that you only get the benefit if you are behind your opponents. So the only difference is it's a very slight difference in wording. Burgeoning triggers off of people playing lands, which is a game action. So ostensibly, if you are 2 lands behind an opponent and you play this, you can get 2 plains, and if that player plays a fetch land, for instance, they put the fetch land into the battlefield and then crack it. Through that, you could put both of those plains onto the battlefield. But the fact that once you've closed the gap with your opponents, that it just stops providing value is it's a shame. But in addition to it, White doesn't have great card advantage. So the biggest problem, we're comparing it to Burgeoning and saying it's not as good as Burgeoning. Burgeoning doesn't see play because Burgeoning suffers from the problem that, well,
you just described.
How often do you have lands in hand that are not the land that you're playing for turn? I mean, really the only time that Burgeoning is good is if you've got some sort of an engine that's keeping you stocked with cards in hand and continually seeing new cards that you don't have all of the economy to be able to get into play on your turn. So White, when we're looking at this, mono White doesn't find itself in that space very often, where it's just got tons of card in hand and it just needs more acceleration to get all the lands into play. So I see this similar to other cards that have been printed recently for White, where yes, it is fetching 2 basic plains to your hand. So if you've got some sort of like a flicker capability or something like that, then sure, then okay. Maybe there's an angle on this that you can play to maybe kind of keep your hand stocked, but even once if you are keeping your hand stocked with extra lands, you're going to hit this threshold where you've got the same amount of lands as your opponents, and this card just turns off and really is a 3 mana do nothing. So it's inspiring that they're trying to examine the space and see what they can do to help White to succeed. This implementation doesn't get there, in my opinion.
I think that's well said. I would add, and what's interesting about this card is I was watching Good Morning Magic with Gavin Verhey. I think it was, even today. I think it was today's episode, but I could be mixing it up with another day. For context, we're the 16th today as we record this. And, Gavin was saying that this is, at least from his perspective and from the perspective of design at Wizards of the Coast, this is a White staple, like a new White staple for Commander. And he was saying, we're trying to avoid printing Commander staples because we know people don't like that. We don't like, you guys feeling like we're essentially printing cards that makes it so that you have to run these cards and then you have fewer meaningful choices to make in deck building. And, I appreciate that. I think probably that holds less true for cEDH just because,
we like staples.
Yeah. and beyond that, they're going to print stuff in other formats, in other in like standard and stuff that's going to be utterly broken, and like we'll play it, or like they'll print stuff in like Modern Horizons that will be super broken for our purposes, and we'll play that, or Commander Legends most recently.
Yeah, no kidding.
But the interesting thing is they said the exception to that is that we want to print more white staples, and this was sort of posited as like the first example of that we should expect to see. And I agree that for like more casual Commander,
right,
for especially for like low colored white decks, this 100% actually to me feels like a staple card. And it feels like a staple card because, I think while Cobble, your analysis was spot like right on for cEDH, when we look at this through the lens of more like lower powered formats, this is like a draw 2, right? 3 mana draw 2. And you can flicker it and like draw more cards, because we're talking about a format where like drawing additional lands is not a problem, because you're going to want to make more land drops over the course of a 10 turn game. We're talking about a format where people are playing their cultivates, and people are playing their Kodama's reaches, and like all kinds of land acceleration. So like people, if you're playing low colored white decks, especially without green, people are often going to stay ahead of you on lands. And so this card is definitely going to let you, sort of keep up with them in that respect, and can also be a powerful value engine because white naturally does flicker things. So it is kind of an exciting card. It's a powerful effect. It's just not generating value at a rate or along an axis that's relevant to our format. We can jam so much fast mana that like getting an extra land drop into play for 3 mana is like rarely relevant. Getting a couple more lands is like, out of deck is rarely super relevant. People are not playing Kodama's Reach and Cultivate. So yeah, this is just a card that is unfortunately not quite there in terms of power level, but 100% feels like it is there in terms of like the requisite effect for a different context, if you catch my drift.
Well, and we've not seen anything like this really in white before.
The first thing that I think of, Callahan, went and I couldn't help but think about it when Pongo, you're talking about white staples. The first thing that I think of when I think of a white staple, land tax. Now I may be now that's a card that is like so good that it's unfair to use that as a lens with which to evaluate new cards that are coming in, because land tax is so broken. But I can't help but compare this to that because of okay, so as long as anybody's got more lands than you, you're going to be drawing. You're going to be basically getting 3 extra cards, and it's repeating. So it's not just when it first comes onto the battlefield, and most of the time you don't care about those cards because they're lands, but you care about them because they're cards, and then you want to use a scroll rack or some way to turn those cards into real cards that you actually care about. And you can do similar things with this. It's just it's powered so far down that I think your assessment is apt. It's that we're coming from a cEDH perspective, probably we're not going to be, this is not for us.
But to your point, Cobble, you said this about burgeoning, and you said this is very familiar with like similar to land tax. Does land tax really see play in cEDH?
It does, but again,
niche play.
Yeah, but that's my point, right? Is it's like even Tatiova isn't terribly interested in burgeoning, and that's like kind of the point, right? Is these cards that in casual, like high-powered or competitive, in casual high-powered Commander are gonna be good. I think about like in like the power level that Nathan the Hermit Druid and like Dan have been playing at recently.
Lasagna
right?
tier.
Yeah. This is going to be great in that tier, right? This will be right in what they're trying to do. For what we're doing, not so much. But you know, it's an interesting card. It's at least indicative of a trend towards more aggressive or more powerful white cards being printed in a modern setting.
Yeah,
Here's to hoping.
My issue, like one of the disappointing parts of the card, is that it only gets plains. If it got like any basic, that would be really hot.
If it got just plains, not basic plains, I think it would be. We would have more of a discussion in cEDH.
Yeah, I mean that's such a different card at that point. That's, you know, you can start playing that in like higher colored decks, right?
Right.
You know, right now this is because it cares about basic lands. You know, you're playing it in 2-color decks at the most. If it hit more than basic plains, then like, you know, one of the limitations of this in mono white is, you know, while mono white does have flicker effects, as you know, as we were talking about before, as Cobble mentioned, it's like better at flickering creatures, where blue is better at flickering kind of everything. But you can play this in a blue white deck, right? And like you're gonna get all those flicker effects.
This actually feels bananas in Brago.
Well, I don't know if that's the thing, right? It doesn't feel Brago. It doesn't feel bananas in cEDH Brago because,
well, yeah,
mostly because like you're just mulling to like all kinds of fast mana in that deck, and
Right.
you would prefer.
I thought we've established that it's not very, that we all think it's not very good in cEDH.
Right? Yeah, we have. You know, I don't need to say much more than that, but you know, if it got any basic, you could play it in your blue white. You can still play it in your blue white decks, but I think you would feel a lot better playing it in your blue white decks if you could get basic islands. And then
yeah, I'd agree with that.
You could also do fun flicker shenanigans with it a lot more easily.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But this isn't the only not quite there mono white card that's in this set. We've also got Monologue Tax, which is a 2 colorless and a white enchantment. It says whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, you create a treasure token. So Pongo, this card is very reminiscent of 2 cards. It's kind of like if Smothering Tithe and Crom had a baby. Is that like a good way of describing this?
You know how like when 2 really attractive parents get together and you expect them to have like an incredibly beautiful baby, and for whatever reason that baby comes out and it looks like a foot. Yeah, this is, you know, I don't know if it's quite that bad, but
it's bad. It's really bad.
It's certainly not as good as the 2 parents that you mentioned. I think Smothering Tithe, obviously, with that card, kind of the big benefit of it is that you're getting like the treasures guaranteed pretty much, like for the draw for turn.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that like I've never seen somebody pay the 2. It does happen, but like it almost never happens. So, you know, you pay that 4 and then like all of a sudden, you know, you are representing 1 mana interaction almost immediately, such that like tapping out for your big expensive value engine was like maybe not as shields down as you know, it would be for most 4 mana engines. And then Crom obviously draws cards, and I think drawing cards is much more powerful than creating treasure tokens in general. So Monologue Tax doesn't quite get the guaranteed value of Smothering Tithe. It doesn't have the combo potential of Smothering Tithe with wheels, is another enormous factor. And it makes treasure tokens, which is good. Don't get me wrong, but it's not as good as drawing a card when somebody casts their second spell per turn. You know, I think that maybe we're being like a little harsh on this card. I could certainly see it seeing some play in some contexts because, you know, like it is really not unusual.
Like what context? Like what context do you think this is playable in?
Not rule of law.
Well, that's the issue, right? And that's the big issue that I was getting to, is that like white decks frequently play rule of law effects, and so this is obviously a major non-bow alongside those. But there are, you know, some more combo oriented white decks, not typically mono white decks, but like, multicolored white decks that could potentially, run this, just sort of as a like meta choice, perhaps. If you're expecting to play against like a lot of, sort of more spell slingery type decks, this might get you 3 treasures immediately. It's just, 3 mana. You've ramped 3 for your next turn, and maybe that's enough that it kind of gets you there. I know that in the metas that I play in, people are like pretty respectful of effects like this. People are pretty respectful of heuristic studies, frustratingly so. As I'm sure,
aware.
Yeah, you can attest to, the amount of times that my heuristic study has just not drawn any cards, and I'm just like shaking my head. Like I'm just like, that meme with the guy who's like eyes just kind of like get wide and like his head goes back a little bit, and he's like, what is even happening?
We play in the literal opposite of the Finns meta.
Right, exactly.
Like
the level of respect is too damn high. So I could easily see this, not generating half as much value there as it would in, more typical places where people are perhaps less respectful. I do think that this card is not like instant staple tier because like I said, it's not as good as your Crom. It's not as good as your Smothering Tithe. And, even something like Smothering Tithe is starting to see less play. And if that card is seeing less play, then this card certainly would not be my pick over that card. I'll put it that way.
So, Cobblepott, I sense you have feelings on this.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
I feel disappointed because the card could have been, this could have been a 1 mana card, I think. I don't feel like it is at 3 mana pulling its weight. It has,
I feel that.
It's got a ceiling of 3 treasures per turn, which is if all 3 of your opponents cast 2 or more spells, which, that's going to happen sometimes, but its ceiling is 3. Most of the time, you're maybe going to see 1 treasure per turn. And, if 2 treasures if people are contesting something.
I think this would be broken at 1 mana, though. Like, maybe at 2 mana, but I think at 1 mana, this would be
is it
broken.
Really?
So
Yeah.
I feel like either they could have brought the cost down, or they could have made it more similar to Smothering Tithe in that it doesn't have an unnecessary or artificial ceiling or cap. So if this was instead, they could have made it when someone plays their first spell each turn, and that's it. You just get one, you get 1 treasure token when someone casts their first spell each turn. That'll create way more treasure, but it's still limited to, just 1 for each person who's participating. That would have been much better, and I would certainly pay 3 for that.
At 3 mana, yeah, I agree.
Or if it was, once they've cast their second turn, each additional turn after, each additional cast after that was another treasure. We look at Smothering Tithe, and it's a real strong card, but I don't feel like it's a mistake. I don't feel like Smothering Tithe is a broken card and needs to be addressed. This feels like
there's some people who think it does.
This feels like them trying to address Smothering Tithe and say, well, Smothering Tithe was too much, and we're gonna buckle down and we're gonna play something that's more reasonable. And this is certainly more reasonable to the point of not being useful.
I like the idea of this at 3, and you get a treasure for each spell after the first spell, because it's fully within flavor, right?
Yeah.
It's fully within flavor. Like even the
and
flavor
it makes
text
sense
says,
with the name of the card,
and it makes sense with the flavor. Yeah, with the name of the card. And I think that would have made it a lot more compelling. I agree with that. I think at 1 mana, we're underestimating just how busted this would be if it, as printed. But what you suggested at 3 mana, I think could be done. There's like a great deal of potential play around that, but it's powerful. Right? Like, and that's what we want to see.
And I love that White's thing with these tax effects, by the way, have turned into people vomiting treasure. I think it's so funny.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know how true that actually is. You know, I think obviously that they're like making sort of like a deliberate homage to Smothering Tithe here. But, you know, please prove me wrong. Wizards like print more white cards with people just vomiting randomly. Like, I'm here for
this
it.
card kind of makes me want to vomit, but not because it's, you know.
Well, moving on to a good card. This card is our first.
Away.
This is a good card. It's a blue card. It's called Theoretical Duplication. That costs 2 and a blue. It's an instant that says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, this turn, create a token that's a copy of that creature. So, I sent that over to Pongo. So Cobblepott. So you think this is a fine card? I disagree. I think it's a really good card. Tell us your thoughts on this one.
So this, you know, there's similar cards that have been printed recently. There's the one that was just 2 sets ago. That's 1 and a blue, where the next creature that comes into play, Mystic Reflection. Yeah, Mystic Reflection. Mm-hmm. This is worded slightly differently. So this is for the rest of this turn. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you get to create, you know, a copy. So if someone's going to have multiple creatures come into play that are non-token, then you're just going to get copies as well. Mm-hmm. Normally, I can't imagine a situation where an opponent, because this is non-token creatures, so once you've cast this, normally what I would expect is someone's going to cast a creature, and then you're going to respond with casting the spell, and they're going to say, okay, all right, you're going to get a copy of this creature as well, and they're probably going to stop casting creatures, and not just like keep on feeding you more creatures necessarily. But yeah, for sure. I mean,
I feel like we're having the opposite discussion. You and I have opposite of feelings on this card. That like, I feel about this card the way you feel about Wandering Archaic, and vice versa.
Okay,
I think this is really good. I think people will cast into it. So I think people are greedy.
So here's my thoughts. How often are we going to want to slot this instead of a counterspell or instead of removal to, you know, just kind of, because this doesn't really fit with any specific game plan. It doesn't propel any particular game plan. It doesn't motivate, you know, and move any particular game plan along. It's a interactive, very, you know, kind of, I would say, high variance card based on the other players that you're playing against. Now, that said, if you're in a meta game where you're playing against a lot of Notion Thieves and Hull Breachers and Opposition Agents and Dockside Extortionists, then sure, absolutely, that, you know, having something like this around to deal with the fact that, oh, somebody's casting a Hull Breacher, I'm going to get one too. I can see that as, you know, just being opportunistic and creating some interesting dynamics in gameplay, because you could say, well, instead let's slot more counter magic that hits creatures, so that when someone casts their Hull Breacher, you can counter the Hull Breacher. This is moving in the other direction. This is saying when someone casts a Hull Breacher, I'm going to get a second Hull Breacher, and now the rest of the table has to deal with 2 Hull Breachers. So it's creating a different dynamic in how that plays out, because now there's two players with Hull Breachers, so neither of them are going to wheel. So there's kind of this parity that's going to happen, and there's kind of this opposing force between the two of them, and one removal doesn't get the table out of the situation. One removal actually makes the situation much more profitable for one player or the other. So it creates some interesting moods there. You know, it changes the landscape. But what is the deck that wants it? You know, what deck is the one
you're not going to like my answer.
Oh, great! Here we go.
I think I know the answer.
Is this the token Lavinia?
This is our obligatory Lavinia mention. There's actually several lists I could think of that would like this. Okay. Specifically blue decks that are low in creature count. This is really good because you get to get the best creature that your opponent has. So I'm going to use Lavinia for this example because I play Lavinia and I work a lot with that deck, so I'm more familiar with it. But sit with me for a moment. Where Lavinia, I'm playing up against Najeela, which is traditionally my worst matchup. I'm playing up against Kenrith, which is traditionally my worst matchup, and I'm playing against Timnacrom, which is traditionally my worst matchup. Somebody plays any bad time, right? Any of them cast any of their commanders, and I cast this in response. I also get that commander, which puts us specifically with Omen Pool, puts you in a completely different game. Because now, if I have a Kenrith and you have a Kenrith, I get to play way differently. It completely changes my game plan. And so, on the surface, this looks like, sure, Timna Thrasios, you're not going to see play. Timnacrom, probably not going to see play. But in these decks, like I could see this in maybe Zur. I could see a world where Kinnan would be, maybe some grindier versions of Kinnan would be interested in this. These decks that play lower amounts of creatures, maybe not lower amounts of creatures, but maybe don't have as like slap you in the face as hard creatures, can play this as a really good way of getting around bad matchups. And this is, and I think Phoenix said this, and I thought Phoenix had, like, when we were talking about this when it got spoiled, Phoenix, Whimsy, and I both had the exact same reaction, which this card is what we thought Mystical Reflection was going to be. Right? Like, we saw Mystical Reflection, and we're like, oh, this card's going to reshape a lot of stuff. This card, especially after testing it, is what we thought Mystical Reflection would be for our decks. This card's really good. Now, again, like I said, Kenrith doesn't need it, Najeela doesn't need it, but Lavinia needs it, and those lower colored decks absolutely need it. And I think it's a slam dunk in those types of decks.
The thing is, and I mean, those are some good points. I think the metagame, the types of counter spells that people have been slotting, of late are typically soft to creatures. So there's not a lot of, creatures don't get countered often. We try to encourage people to, run unconditional counters so that they can be able to counter creatures and deal with that. But it's still a lot of the time you've got a lot of miscasts and, negate style kind of counter magic in the metagame. When someone casts a problematic commander and somebody else is going to respond with theoretical duplication to get another copy of that problematic commander. Well, somebody else, a third party who has a counterspell in hand that is likely not going to be able to hit a creature will be able to hit an instant. And I'm thinking that I in those circumstances when if you're going to put a copy of something that's a really threatening card onto the battlefield and people are looking at the proposition of having two copies of something that's really problematic, they're going to counter one of the two of them. And this one being an instant is going to draw more of that counter magic just by virtue of the fact that it's an instant and isn't a creature.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
So
I will say the fact that it's blue gives you a lot more, because I mean, again, like you're going to be playing a lot of those same spells, and the decks that are going to want this are going to generally be controlling mid-range decks. And so because this can be a really good way to get you ahead in those shells in lower colors. And so in my perspective, you will be able to defend this more often than not, and especially in the meta, the way that I've been seeing it go is, you know, people, if I'm like, all right, I'm going to cast this, and somebody tries to counter it once, you know, I don't feel like most people that are not like on other mid-range strategies are going to fight over a second counterspell very much, personally, if it's not game ending. And this is enough to draw a counterspell. I don't know if it's good enough to draw two.
I have a couple of points about this card.
Yeah, go for it. Sorry.
Obviously,
I had thoughts.
The first point I want to make, I think, I already can kind of imagine what Callahan's reaction is going to be. But I just wanted to point out the fact that you mentioned Lavinia's bad matchups, and you just literally named like 3/4 of the cEDH meta.
What? I named Najila, I named Kenrith, and then I said Crom.
Timna Crom, yeah.
I don't know that I'd say that's 3/4 of the meta.
I feel like it's a pretty 3/4 amount.
Is highballing that a little
bit.
But
I'm exaggerating for effect.
We're still the best anti-Nas deck.
So I actually feel like this card, you know, like a lot of somewhat similar cards, is going to have this problem of like it's just going to kind of rot in your hand a lot of the time. You know, you're going to tap out to do something, you know, that you sort of need to do more urgently on your turn. And that's like when someone's going to develop their Kenrith, like that's when someone's going to develop their Crom. And then you're just going to have this and you're just going to be like looking at it and being like, well, shit, like I wish I had 3 mana like sooner to do this. You know, you're going to end up waiting for somebody to cast something, you know, more impactful. And, you know, you're just going to see turns passing by and like, you know, in many situations, this card's just not going to be good enough to get you out of the situation. You know, you would need a card to get you out of like a sort of more general purpose counterspell or something like that. You know, I think that if a deck is not playing Phyrexian Metamorph, it probably doesn't want this card, right? Like, you know, there's like something to be said for the potential advantage of having like a, you know, pseudo creature silence in addition to like a copy effect. But it kind of feels like, you know, a lot of the time, if you're playing this as a generic value engine, and you kind of have to be playing it as a generic value engine, you might as well just copy the thing at sorcery speed. And like, I don't know that the silence effect is actually that relevant. Because like, how many creatures per turn are you playing, right? Like,
right.
Yeah. I mean, I see what you're saying. I don't know. I think those are good points. I just think that, what's the words I'm looking for? Like,
I think your point was kind of that, like, in a deck that doesn't have much better options, that this is a fine option. And I think you're right.
I think it is a good card. I don't think it is like going to be a format staple for a lot of things, but the decks that were interested in Mystical Reflection are going to be interested in this card. And I think this is certainly better than Mystical Reflection.
Well, I think Mystical Reflection has the potential upside of being Essence Scatter that this doesn't, right? Like, that's a pretty major difference.
Yeah, I mean, my evaluation of this really comes down to in my opinion, it's better than Phyrexian Metamorph, but not as good as Phantasmal Image. But it's like on par with both those cards, in my opinion. And I do think that having a silence effect is much more relevant than, you know.
Well, if it was a real silence effect, but it's a silence
right. It's a pseudo effect, but this also
even
comes.
Then it's not, right, because it's.
But we just had this argument last week, right, where we were talking about Wandering Archaic, and everybody was telling me that, oh, well, people will cast some spells into it, and then I get reports back from Ian, and okay, maybe I was wrong about Wandering Archaic. It seems that people are greedy motherfuckers. and are casting in. He had somebody cast an Intuition and a Demonic Tutor into his Wandering Archaic, and I really, really, really want to know if that person like graduated high school, because like that's just insane to me. But like this, I feel like it's like a similar thing, right? Because if you're going to be evaluating like Wandering Archaic, where it's like, okay, so this is like a Ristic Study effect, where people have to pay into it, right? I mean, this is in that same category at that point, is it not? Like it's still like it's a tax in a way of saying, okay, I'm going to get your Crom or your Kenrith or whatever, and then anything else you play this turn, I'm also going to get. And it's a suggestive tax, sure, for a turn, but I mean, at instant speed, that's certainly worth at least having a conversation about in low color blue decks.
Well, the point I wanted to make is that you have to think about like some of the times where people might play multiple creatures in a turn. Like if somebody plays Grand Abolisher and you get a copy of their Grand Abolisher, but they still get a Grand Abolisher, they're going to follow it up with a Dockside and like try to win in that spot. And that's where this differs from a true silence effect.
Right. But then even
the silence outside of it. If you're looking at this, if you're looking at it as a creature, that's, because really for the most part, what this is this is a clone that can only be played with flash. Is what this card is.
Okay.
And having the impetus such that you can't play it on a main phase. It's a clone effect that you can only play in response to somebody else playing their creature. So not even you can only play it on your opponent's turns. It's a clone that can only be played in response to somebody else playing a creature. It just makes it so much more narrow in its application. Maybe the in the problematic matchup, for instance, and you're saying, okay, this is going to be my equalizer.
It's not the equalizer. Sure. It makes it worsens the blow, because I mean, especially in a deck like Lavinia, a lot of what we did in the update was playing more like creatures and things that add that value, and moving it to a more mid-range strategy where like seeing a Kenrith is not the end of the world.
Right. And
this just kind of adds to that like layer, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's just one of those things where, you're going to have to Pongo's point, hold up the 3 mana.
Oh yeah.
And that's,
you might do that a lot. You might have to do that in multiple turns.
At which point,
play creatures.
When you're doing that, you're depriving yourself. This is in itself kind of capturing the essence of what was terrible about the Flash meta. Because in the Flash Hulk meta, everybody always had to hold up mana to be able to interact with any flash that might happen. So because they were always holding up that mana, they were stifling their own development. So they couldn't develop because they had to hold that mana open. And this card, I think this card in most of its applications is going to exert that force. This card is going to stifle your own development because you're going to be holding mana open, waiting for the opportunity to use it.
I mean, yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
So
you both make good, compelling arguments. But I don't know.
We could wax poetic on this card for another 20 minutes, but I think we could probably move on.
I mean, it's worth trying out, and I certainly think it's worth trying out. In a place like Lavinia.
And I think I said this earlier. It's like I am clearly wrong about Wandering Archaic, because I've had multiple people report to me people just casting spells into this thing.
The thing about Wandering Archaic is
blows my mind.
Right, Wandering Archaic doesn't need people to cast things into it for to have a positive effect. If it's holding people off from casting their spells because they don't want to cast into it, it's also doing its job. So,
right.
But
it's just bananas to me that anybody would cast a tutor with that card on the battlefield. it literally it blows my mind. That is the greediest thing I could possibly imagine.
Yeah, that's definitely loose play.
Yeah. But anyway, there's some interesting cards, some interesting black cards that got printed in this
Strong
set.
black cards.
Yeah. I don't know how good all of them are, but they're certainly intriguing. And this one I think is pretty good. I don't know how I feel about it. I feel like it's very good and disruptive, but we'll see what it does. It's Cunning Rhetoric. It's 2 colorless and a black enchantment that says whenever an opponent attacks you or one or more planeswalkers you control, exile the top card of that player's library. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. So Pongo, this is not a card that you want to see if you're Nagila, I would assume.
That's fair. Point of clarification on this card is, to my understanding, is it's only going to trigger one time, regardless of how many creatures you attack with. So, you can still win through this, right? Right. It's not the end of the world. And
it's not great.
it's not ideal, but you can attack other people, right? So I think against Nagila specifically, it's maybe less effective at. No, I mean, essentially none of these effects, if we compare it to Ghostly Prison, for example, none of these effects actually stop Nagila unless everyone has them. And even then, if you can Dockside into enough mana, you can theoretically still get around it, because the way it works is that for a card like this, and for a card like Ghostly Prison, the tokens that you have entering play, tapped and attacking, you don't have to pay any taxes for that. They're not triggering Cunning Rhetoric. So on your combo turn, as long as you can sort of send your attackers to somebody else and then send the token copies over to the Ghostly Prison player or the Cunning Rhetoric player, they're not getting any benefit from their ability. So, this card is interesting. I like the effect a lot. Let me say that. I like this more than, your Propaganda and your Ghostly Prison. I actually kind of hate it from the perspective that it feels like a more powerful version of those effects to me. It's less good at disrupting infinite token beat win cons as something like Ghostly Prison or Propaganda. But I feel like this card, while it's going to not stop people from attacking you, and so you're not going to be necessarily protected from somebody being able to swing in with a big creature or something like that, it is going to ward away all that little chip damage, because people are not going to want to let you essentially draw upwards of 4, 5, 6, 7 cards from their deck as well. So I think from that perspective, it's going to be potentially a stronger reward than something like Ghostly Prison would be. It's in black now, so black all of a sudden now has this effect that really solidly felt like it should be a white effect, should be a blue effect, should have kind of stayed there.
I feel like we've had that
this conversation
happen a lot recently.
So there you go. Why not? And in terms of cEDH, I think that it's just there's not enough decks that care enough about attacking that they have to attack you if this comes into play. So 3 mana to basically suggestively say to a Tymna player don't attack me. You can if you absolutely need to. That's not a problem whatsoever. Maybe I'll get a card out of the deal. That might be relevant in this context, but if you're trying to win this turn, you're gonna attack me, and probably be totally fine. It just doesn't feel like it's operating along a relevant enough axis for cEDH. People might choose not to send their Crom at you, and if you're really concerned about protecting your life total, okay, maybe that's decent. But at the same time, cEDH games are just done so fast typically that people can send their attacks elsewhere, and like, like it's just not that impactful ultimately.
I wanted to pose the question. Suppose you are a Tymna or a Najeela, or you're a deck that is going to attack and plans to win.
Right.
If a big part of your game engine is through attacking, as evidenced by Tymna or Najeela, and you're not going to win this turn, what circumstances do you actually attack into somebody who has a Cunning Rhetoric? Or is it?
That's a good question.
Do you ever actually, how risk averse? And I think that might be just might be something that just varies per player, how risk averse they individually are. I mean, to me, this is a pretty strong deterrent. If I don't have the pieces I need to win, if there's the possibility that I might reveal an Adnaz off the top of my deck to somebody,
right?
It's a strong deterrent. But as you say, is that enough? Because it'll keep people off your backs. So like maybe if you're an Adnaz deck, well, you have the potential to reveal this from your Adnaz to burn yourself for 3. But I mean, how much pressure does it exert before you get an Adnaz out to keep your life total high? I don't know. I'm not convinced.
I mean, the opportunity cost for running this in an Adnaz deck is just too high.
Right.
Like this could be a 3 mana, do absolutely nothing. And like you give your opponents the option to make it a 3 mana, do absolutely nothing. And it's on an axis of play that's much, much harder, or rather I should say much easier for an opponent to justify not doing compared to something like casting multiple spells per turn, right?
Right.
Compared to something like drawing additional cards. If we wanted to talk about like Monologue Tax or Crom and like Smothering Tithe as examples.
Right. I think people in my, just looking at the people talking about it on social media, people are, I think, evaluating it from the point of view of, oh, this is card advantage because, this is going to be a source of card draw. I don't think it's very often going to ever actually be providing cards to people because of how risk averse I think I perceive most people in the metagame to be. If they're not planning to win that turn, they're just going to point their attacks elsewhere. They're never going to give you cards off the top of their deck.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, like the Tymna deck, I think can justify not drawing one extra card, right? In a lot of situations, it's still a broken card to draw 2 cards every turn, right? Or even 1 extra card per turn is like, it's good. Meanwhile, your opponent spent 3 mana to accomplish nothing except like deny you 1 card draw per turn. This is like not even Hull Breacher level good for 3 mana. And Najeela, while this is stronger against Najeela, that's only sort of very early on when they're like trying to get to sort of critical mass. And so if you're the only person who's open very, very early on, then sure, maybe you'll get, 2 additional cards off of this. At which point they have 4 warrior or 3 warrior tokens in Najeela, and like, maybe you'll get 1 extra card if they send Najeela your way, but they can send like the 3 warriors elsewhere and have like 7 now. And from that point on, they probably don't really need to attack you much more. So, you're hoping specifically to play against Najeela, first of all. And second of all, you're hoping that no other opponent is presenting an open lane. And like third of all, once Najeela is ready to win, this card no longer really has much relevant text. Because, if they've got the critical mass whereby they can swing elsewhere, they can just send the additional warrior tokens at you. And at a certain point, that math ends up working out such that, they're going to kill you first without ever declaring any attacks at you. It's just kind of how the exponential math works. So So yeah, like I think that you were right on the money by saying that evaluating this as a value engine is not the right way to go about it, except perhaps in like more casual circles, where again, I feel like in many respects this kind of feels like a stronger deterrent than having to pay 2 mana to attack.
Right.
It is really good. That it's like much better than Ghostly Prison. Like, in my opinion, it's significantly better, right? Like, I think the card advantage and then color stripping it is just really good. And the thing is, I'm not saying we should play it. I don't think we should. I don't think it's very good in cEDH. It's a lot closer to something I would consider than Ghostly Prison. And this is an argument we have with Charles sometimes. It's Charles thinks that, Ghostly Prison is, a card that we should consider playing. And, we've kind of gone back and forth on that a lot. Regardless, is the overwhelming kind of consensus is within the community that, playing Ghostly Prison isn't worth it. And this seems significantly better, much closer to something I would consider evaluating, but definitely not like, at the point where if it was whenever an opponent attacks, right, that's a whole different ballgame, right?
Yeah, and if it was for each creature, I think I actually was doing the math before as if I was counting each creature. So in actuality, it's even worse against Najeela than I made it out to sound, because you're gonna get one card, right, and then they never attack you ever again, right? Like, sorry to interrupt. I just needed to correct that.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll see exactly what it does, but
it's a cool design. It's
a cool design.
Yeah,
not going to get there for cEDH, I don't think.
I will say the art is fucking fantastic. It's really cool. Oh, I gotta say, I think I said this last week, is Strixhaven overall doesn't really have a ton of cEDH stuff in it, but I love this set so much because the Mystical Archives are just a slam dunk, and the art is so cool on all of these cards. Even the stuff in the main set, the archive stuff looks cool. Regardless of whether or not everything is cEDH playable, the cards are cool, right? They're still interesting. We're talking about them, and the arts are cool. And you know what? Slam dunk. And this is a lot of people like this as a commander or casual commander set too. So good for them. Not everything has to be a cEDH set. But next we've got another card, and Cobble, I think you were talking about this on Twitter, is King Duelist. It's a 1 colorless and a black creature that's a 2/2 that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, you and target opponent each reveal the top card of your library. You each lose life equal to the mana value of the card revealed by the other player. You each put the card you revealed into your hand. So Cobble, you were talking about this on Twitter, and this is obvious. This is a Bob effect,
right?
A lot of people were confused by this card.
I was talking about this on Twitter mainly because I was aggravated at the clumsy wording that is very, very challenging and very confusing and misleading, just because of the use of plural versus singular. So just to be clear, what this is saying is, at the beginning of your upkeep, you and target opponent each reveal the top card of your respective libraries. So you reveal the top card of your library, and the opponent you chose reveals the top card of their library. And then you trade damage based on what the other person revealed, and then you each put the card that you revealed into your hand. So it's basically doubling up on Bob, and it is not a bad card for casual. It's not a bad card in 60 card formats.
There are people in Legacy that are talking about this card,
right? Because of the fact that you can treat it as burn if you're aggressively going to be wanting to use this as an engine for burning your opponents out. It can backfire, of course, because you don't know what your opponents are going to be revealing off the top of their decks too. But if you're doing some sort of a reanimator strategy or something like that, and you know that you're just going to be randomly or having the variance in favor of you revealing large
flipping
CMC.
off a Gristle brand,
right? So,
baby,
right? So,
right,
and the reason why that's good in 60 card is because it's 2-player and it's heads up, and that is going to be a fast enough clock for it to be able to compensate for handing card advantage to your opponent, because that's the thing that really is the gating factor that makes it not quite admissible for cEDH. So if you're playing 2-player, you're and you draw a card and your opponent draws a card, and you are constructing your deck in such a way that you are having higher average CMC or higher average mana value to be able to compensate for the fact that you're handing card advantage to your opponent. Because you're going to be able to clear that clock is fast enough that you're going to be able to put your opponent out of the game quickly. In the case of playing against 3 opponents that each have 40 life, there aren't cards in print that allow you to create a clock. Even you look at Yuriko decks, where that's I think where some of the conversation has come up in cEDH for people talking about this card, where Yuriko is symmetrically putting a clock on all opponents burning, but even in that case, the burn implementation of Yuriko is decidedly less powerful than the implementations of Yuriko that are more insistent on disruption and stacks effects and things like that, rather than kind of full core burn. That said, sure, this could probably be useful in Yuriko because you're creating card advantage, but still the clock in that particular case is going to be slower than, I think, the advantage that you're giving to your opponents by allowing them also to have a card. So I feel like this is you can choose an opponent that is behind to kind of mitigate it to some degree. So there's like a Dusk Mantle Seer or something like this that was like a 4 mana Bob that came out a while back that was symmetric and everybody got a card out of it, and it burned all of your opponents. You certainly don't see that, and this is only somewhat better than that effect because you're not giving everybody a card. You're just choosing one person to get a card. But the fact that you're choosing somebody else to get a card is, just for my money. I'm happy to have just normal Bob, and this just doesn't get there for me.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add about this card. Like, it's not a good card. We're in a time now where people are starting to cut Bob from their deck, and certainly people are not gonna play this if they're cutting Bob.
I gotta say this real quick, because when I was looking at our show notes before we went in, I saw the word shared Bob, and my lizard brain saw SpongeBob and got really confused.
Shared Bob SquarePants.
No, that's next year. We're gonna get the crossover SpongeBob SquarePants set. Just wait. Patrick Star is going to break cEDH.
Please no.
He's 5 points, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a point on his head. That 1 for each color. 5 color food chain. draw 5 cards when he enters the battlefield.
No.
Oh man, onto our next card.
You heard it here first.
God,
misery.
man. Next card on the list is another black card. It's Stinging Study. It's a 4 colorless and a black instant that says you draw X cards and you lose X life, where X is the mana value of a commander you own on the battlefield or in the command zone. I hate mana value. It doesn't have the same ring as CMC. I just have to get it out of there. Anyhow, Pongo, this card. 5 mana, you draw X, where X is the CMC of your commander. Pretty much wherever it is, as long as it's not in your hand or in the graveyard. So what do we think about this card?
I don't think it's good enough. I think, let me go over sort of the points in its favor, right? So there's a good number of decks where this is going to be 5 CMC, draw 5. And I think that's like, I'm like only kind of like opening one of my 2 eyes, like getting up out of bed, when it's doing that for 5 CMC. I don't, I don't think I'm like fully awake. I'm like still kind of groggy and I'm like, you know what? Like, nah, forget about it. You could conceivably play this in a deck like Kamal, the new partner Kamal. Then you'd be playing Kamal alongside like a black partner. And I think his CMC is 8. So at which point, you've got a 5 mana instant speed, draw 8. And lose 8 life, obviously. That's like, like, I think I'm still probably in bed at that point. Just because, like, here's the thing. It's not ad nauseum, right? It's just not ad nauseum. Like, for 5 mana, why am I only drawing 8 cards? When I could be drawing 20 plus cards and playing a better commander than Kamal.
So what would get you out of bed for this?
7 mana, draw 40.
Yeah, 7 mana, draw 40 is pretty reasonable.
May I intrigue you and appear into the abyss?
There are commanders. There's the Scarecrow commander, the Reaper King, which I believe is a 5. It's a 5 color commander. And because of the way it's like hybrid mana works, you can draw 10 cards for 5 mana. You're playing the Reaper King for some reason at that point, like who does very, very little compared to a lot of other 5 color options. So I don't know that this card is going to single-handedly propel that card into cEDH relevance. And, if we're like memeing and like thinking about like the biggest possible commander, I think that you could play, I think it's
Iname as one.
Iname as one at 12 CMC. So for 5 mana, you can draw 12 cards and lose 12 life. Yeah, sorry. I think I'm still in bed at this point. It's just not ad nauseum. Like, this card is just it's not getting there in decks with cheaper commanders, and I don't see the appeal of playing a more expensive commander, giving up on the potential to have like an actual commander, like Crom, like Tevesh, just so I can play, a strictly worse ad nauseum or like a much, much worse peer into the abyss.
I think that it's worth saying that this is not a bad card. I mean, 5 mana draw 8 or 5 mana draw 5 or 6 is at instant speed is great, but we live in a world where we have access to ad nauseam and peer into the abyss, and already, I mean, if you're playing a deck that's constructed to be able to play an ad nauseam game, then you are already kind of pushing the tolerance of what you can accept slot-wise when you include Peer into the Abyss, because, that's a 7 mana hit. Are you going to bump Peer into the Abyss to put Stinging Study in its stead? Or are you going to play Stinging Study in addition to Peer into the Abyss and your ad nause? It's one of those things where we have such an embarrassment of riches of huge mana advantage in that shell that are huge, just card advantage through ad nauseam peer into the abyss, that you really have to beat one of those two cards, really, I think, at this mana cost to be able to play. And I mean, this is a good card. That's, drawing 5 or 6 cards or 8 cards or, whatever, at instant speed is fantastic. It's just not fantastic enough compared to what we've already got.
I think I know what will get me out of bed to play this card.
What's that?
Here we go.
Play it in mono black Duelist.
There you go.
That's a 5 mana, draw 16? That's okay.
That's actually pretty hot.
I mean, you need to have Duelist in play first, but
Right.
What about Shadrick Silverquill? I opened one of those today, so I'm really excited. I might build a casual deck, guys. I'm really excited. The next card on our list is a card called Incarnation Technique. It is a 4 colorless and a black sorcery that has this ability that's new to this commander set called Demonstrate. That says when you cast this spell, you may copy it. If you do, choose an opponent to also copy it. The ability on the card is mill 5 cards, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So Demonstrate's an interesting mechanic, but Cobblepott, what is your take on this card?
So this is it's a mill card, and it's a reanimation spell, and it's a win con. I don't think it's particularly great at any of those things individually. So let's kind of break it down into each of those slots. So it's 5 mana sorcery speed. So this is not something that you're going to be doing interactively. This is something you're going to be doing on your turn, and you're going to have to kind of build up to it because of the mana investment that we have here. So if you cast it just for its standard, you just cast it and you don't demonstrate, you're going to mill 5 cards and return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. And that is something that you can maybe combine with if you're have an Underworld Breach out, then if you've got Underworld Breach and Dockside Extortionist and some way to kill your Dockside Extortionist, then this is going to let you propel through the rest of your deck and keep on recurring your Dockside Extortionist and, win whichever way you want to. The more interesting thing that you can do with this is to demonstrate, which means that you get 2 copies of it. So you're going to mill 10 cards, return 2 creatures, and then target an opponent to mill. Ostensibly, if you have a loop going with this, you can mill all your opponents out completely of all of the cards that they have in their decks. And yes, they're going to be able to put their creatures into play, but if they can't win instantaneously, then they're going to die when they go to their draw steps. I think that in a world where Spleenface is playing Razaketh, there's some risk involved in having that expectation. But look, how well does it do all those things? Okay. If you are wanting to put together some sort of a win con with this, that's an A+B win con. You either have to have those creatures already in your graveyard, or you have to cross your fingers that your top 10 cards is going to be able to assemble the win con that you're looking for. Plus you have to have some level of confidence that the opponent that you're handing a copy of this to isn't going to mill something that's going to be disruptive to whatever your game is. If your particular local meta is saturated with opposition agents and hull breachers and things like that, or worse, gilded drakes and so on, choosing to opt into the demonstrate with this definitely has risk associated with it because of how disruptive a lot of those creatures are. So it's one of those things where regardless of what the price is of this spell, the mechanics of how it plays out seems kind of dodgy to me, and has kind of like a big surface for exploitation by your opponents to make it go kind of against what your will is intended. And then when you combine that with the fact that it's a sorcery speed 5 mana spell, I mean, you're not going to be doing a whole lot more with your turn, or you're not going to have a lot of mana left over to protect it, unless you're already doing some sort of a dockside loop or something like that. In which case, then it's just a 5 mana finish them off kind of a spell, when already Brain Freeze is much more compact and just as effective or more effective because it has Storm. So for my money, this I don't see this getting there, but I can appreciate the interesting angles of play that it produces and the fact that it can do multiple different things and has a lot of utility. I think it's super exciting for casual, just because there's the uncertainty there, but also political kind of things where, hey, let's all get together and take on the person who's the threat or whatever, and come from behind and win or something like that. But for cEDH, I just don't think this has what it needs.
It's an interesting card.
I mean, I love both of these cards for more like casual EDH, like Cobble was saying. And I think that like the design, from the perspective of design, I'm totally okay with commander cards, being like higher CMC, not being like targeted towards like really spiky players, kind of like following through with that design philosophy that I was talking about before, that Gavin was kind of getting at, where they're trying to avoid making like crazy staple cards. This doesn't scream crazy staple card in black to me. The last card doesn't scream crazy staple card to me, but like in the right context, these are like really like flashy and powerful and like really exciting. So like they're staples for certain decks. Incarnation Technique, if I still had my casual like Sultai Sidisi deck, like I would be super excited to play this card, because like you can probably find an opponent who like they're not going to play creatures that you care about that much, but you play this card and you make a copy of it, you mill 5 cards, trigger Sidisi to get a 2/2 zombie, reanimate something that you like previously milled with Sidisi or with this card, and then do that all over again. Like that's crazy. Like I would be all for that. That's super exciting. But as far as cEDH is concerned, I think Cobble said pretty much everything that needs to be said.
Yeah. Moving on down to the red cards here for us. We've got Rionya, Fire Dancer. It's a legendary creature that costs 3 colorless and 2 red. It's a 3/4 that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create X tokens that are copies of another target creature you control, where X is 1 plus the number of instants and sorcery spells you've cast this turn. They gain haste. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. Pongo, am I correct? This goes infinite pretty fast, right?
Yeah, I hate to say it. Unfortunately, we're probably not playing this in Najeela. It's pretty hot that you can play this.
It's not a warrior.
Well, if it was a warrior, then maybe I would consider it more strongly. But the 5 mana is mainly the issue, and needing to combo it with something else. It goes infinite pretty rapidly with Dockside Extortionist in Najeela to take extra combat steps. But like, what else does it do other than that, right? Like, I guess theoretically you can copy like an extra, I don't know, maybe Mindblade Render. That might be like one of the best things you can theoretically copy, because like losing things at the end step means that like copying a Dark Confidant's not that exciting. Copying, like a lot of value engines, creature-based value engines that require an opponent to do something. Like imagine you had a Crom in play, not that exciting. Copying legendary creatures, not that exciting. So really, like, it ends up needing to combo with, at least in that deck, Dockside Extortionist, or you could theoretically get some like limited amount of value by making an extra warrior token and then like getting one permanent additional warrior token. But for 5 mana, that's not all that exciting, right? You can theoretically play this alongside things like Combat Celebrant, and like that's pretty cool. But you would want to, I think, be playing Combat Celebrant first. And there are certainly decks where I think that's true, right? Like if you play this in Winota, I think that's probably decent. I would have to speak to Winota players, but I could certainly see that here.
Let's get Ian on the phone.
Yeah, being a human and all, also very relevant. And I know Godo players had considered it, and I think that ultimately they've kind of decided not to play it. And I'll trust their judgment on that one. But what this can do is essentially, do something similar to Godo Helm type combos. It's not identical. Why? Because with Godo Helm, you create tokens that are not legendary, so you can actually like accumulate essentially infinite 3/3s. With this, you have to sacrifice the original Godo, I think, to the legendary rule, and then you have to sacrifice your tokens to the legendary rule so you can keep attacking with the 3/3. And if somebody has something that blocks the 3/3, then I think you're done at that point, right? So, it's certainly less consistent than something like Helm as far as those combos are concerned, even if it feels like it's a potential consideration there.
Right.
Is it a deck on its own?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Like, so obviously in that deck, you're probably playing like Combat Celebrant and stuff like that, right? Like,
right.
The biggest issue is that I don't think it's better than a lot of other mono red options. You need to cast your 5-drop, and you also need to have the Combat Celebrant. These things are kind of hard to tutor for in mono red, so you can't necessarily have them all that reliably. It needs to be a creature, so you're not suddenly comboing this with like your other additional red extra combat step things that exist. So while I wouldn't be surprised to see this as a deck, I just don't think it's going to be as good as like Godo, for example. Right. I don't think it's going to be as good as Magda. I just think that it gets outclassed by a lot of mono red commanders.
Right.
I think that it is going to make the biggest presence in Winota, just because of the fact that Winota, because of the fact that it's a human, will get around having to pay for it. And then once you get it onto the battlefield, then you're in a really good situation, because it's going to create some number of tokens. And for Winota, you don't have to get a special. I mean, I think Winota does run Combat Celebrant, but you don't need Combat Celebrant to get huge amount of value off of this.
This is going to get value real quick on its own.
Right. So in the context of Winota, you cast, 1 or 2 instants or sorceries, and then you choose one of your non-human creatures, you get those, and then attack with them with, Winota on the battlefield, and all of a sudden you're just creating a huge amount of value very quickly. And even if it's non-infinite, a lot of times you're probably going to be able to put something together just because of how many cards you're looking at off the top of your deck and putting things onto the battlefield.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, this feels like a potentially very strong card for Winota.
Ian, let's get him. I need to call him up. Next card up on our list is our last card on the list is Cursed Mirror. It's a 2 colorless and a red artifact that you can tap it and add a red. And it says, as Cursed Mirror enters the battlefield, you may have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield till end of turn, except it has haste. Yep. So Cobblepott, this is a sort of, phantasmal image-esque type creature thing. That's also a mana rock. What do we think of this thing?
So, this is primarily being talked about for Godo, which already runs Heat Shimmer and Twin Flame, which the idea here is the mainline Godo combo is 11 mana top to bottom. So, you pay for the Godo, and then your Helm comes in, and then you have to activate Helm. Then you still have to be able to attack with Godo, and he doesn't naturally have haste. So what happens is if you cast Godo and then cast Heat Shimmer or Twin Flame, then the copy that comes into the battlefield has haste and allows you to string together. Instead of going for Helm of the Host first, what happens is you cast your Godo and get Hammer of Nazan, which will attach itself naturally, and then also will allow other equipment to be attached for free. So you can, cast your Godo, go get Hammer of Nazan, get it attached, and then you cast a copy, like Heat Shimmer or Twin Flame, to make a copy of the Godo to go and actually get the Helm of the Host and then be able to attach it. And now you've wound up skirting the cost and bringing the cost down to 8 or 9 in that case. This is basically just another means of getting there for a reduced price from the full 11. So that line where you cast the Godo and then cast a copy spell of one kind or another is a strong line for that deck. So increasing the saturation by having another 3 mana way of doing that is just going to be one of those things where it's not going to be bumping Heat Shimmer or Twin Flame out. It's going to be added, and it'll just increase the number of lines that are able to make that play. So I don't know what they're bumping out in order to get it in, but the fact that this leaves behind an artifact in case you get disrupted that's a mana rock is also just, it's superior to what is already there, because Heat Shimmer and Twin Flame, it's like if you get disrupted, well, okay, then you're disrupted. So this at least kind of has the consolation prize of helping you to rebuild if something happened. So it's a good addition, and I think that people who have been doing testing with it so far have been pleased and have been saying that it's a winner.
It looks really cool.
Yeah, great Godo card.
Well, that about wraps things up for our set review here. There were no real humdingers in green. Nothing that we really felt too enthused about. Right. Which is interesting because green has been really good for a while. This set had a lot of good black stuff, I felt like.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would say that it had a lot of good. It has a lot of stuff
intriguing.
Sure. Yeah, really good is putting it a little far.
Right.
Did I say really good?
Yeah.
No. It had intriguing cards in all the colors that were not green. Green was pretty underwhelming. Right. But it'll be interesting. But that actually wraps up this first season of the Mind Sculptors, believe it or not. We kind of Pongo, Cobblepott, and I started with the Commander Legends set review. Man, what was that? All the way back in November?
It's been a minute.
And it's been a minute. And turns out that we all kind of worked well together. So here we are today. But just so you guys know, what we're going to be doing here over the next few months is we won't be having the main podcast. What we will be doing is we're going to be doing coverage of Major League Commander. So here at the end, I am going to break it down for our listeners so you guys can get really hyped up about it. So what Major League Commander is it's a thing that we are doing with the r/competitive EDH Discord server, and as well as the competitive EDH decklist database. And so what this is, we've got 32 players that are either notable players in the community or content creators who are all going to be playing, and they're broken up into 8 divisions, all regionally as best we could allocated. And so what we're going to do is there's been a draft order that has been determined. And what they're going to do is they're going to have 4 decks that they have to pick off of the cEDH database. And they can only pick one of the tabs. So, we're not going to see 4 different versions of Najeela. There's only that Najeela tempo. Only one person can get that. They can pick whatever list they want. But what they're going to do is they're going to pick 4 lists, and they're going to draft them off of the database. And then they're going to have to play each of those lists at least once, but no more than 3 times. So we're going to get to see a lot of the cards off the database, but it's going to be a 12-week season. Everybody has 2 buys. And we have a predetermined schedule that'll be in the links down below. And there will be home players who get to go first. And then everybody else rolls to see who goes second, third, and fourth. And it's going to be really interesting how this all goes down, because basically what's going to happen at the end of the season, each division winner will go to the playoffs plus 1 wild card player from each conference. So there's 2 conferences with 4 divisions. The top 2 players with the best record that make the playoffs get a bye, automatically go to the finals. And then the other 8 players have a playoff. And that's all going to be on August 7th. But it all kicks off on May 1st with the MLC deck draft. And that's going to be in the r/cEDH Discord server, which I'm going to link here in the description as well. But we're going to have a lot of really cool coverage for that. All of our gameplay is going to be that. Really from May all the way till August is what we're going to be doing. And then what we're also going to be doing is, in place of the podcast during that time, what we're going to be doing is a show called MLC Weekly. And that is going to be myself, Lasergician, who is an esports commentator, and Cobblepott, I believe you're doing this with us too.
That's right.
We'll be breaking down what happened each week and giving our insights into how the season's going. It's going to be kind of like college game day. And that will come out Friday mornings every week before MLC games start. So that'll be kind of your weekend kickoff for the games. And they're going to go all weekend. So, you'll have a Friday night game. You'll have, I believe we had 5 games on Saturday afternoon and then 2 games on Sunday. So you'll have plenty of opportunities to watch. Plus, we're going to record one and have a feature game that will come out every week as well. That'll usually be about a week behind everything else, though. So that's really exciting. This is something Pongo and I have been planning for a while. And I'm really excited to be doing this. If you've seen on Twitter, I changed my Twitter bio to cEDH Mel Kuiper because I've been doing mock drafts and predicting what I think people are going to do. And I just think this is so much fun. I'm so ready for it.
Yeah,
and Pongo's going to be playing.
Really exciting.
Oh yeah, I'm super hyped for it.
Who's all in your division? I forget everybody that's in your division.
It's me. I remember Play M. Man, I need to go check. I'm gonna make a fool of myself.
You Play M Pontus?
Yeah, Pontus. We were triple P.
Yeah.
And then who was the last person? Let me see if I can find out.
Is it Coinman?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow, Coin Man. Oh my goodness. That's a blast from the past.
Let me pull up the conferences because I think you'll get a kick out of this. So we've got some interest. So I'll just start in the Western Conference. The Pacific Division in the Western Conference is Cameron from the Lab Maniacs. He's going to be participating. Securia, who's actually from Porto, Portugal. He's filling in for Falcon, who had to drop out. And I didn't want to rearrange the divisions. So he's going to be playing in the Western Conference. Sage from Sage of Fables, they are going to be in the Pacific Conference. Then Josh from Second 7 MTG will be over there. Southwest Division will be Higher from the cEDH Nexus. Fukins, who's been in quite a few of the last top 16s of these last few big tournaments. Ken, our good friend from Stack DDH. LJ from the Reflecting Pool. That's going to be the Southwest. Midwest Conference or Division is going to be our own Phoenix. Snacks, she's been on the channel before. Nick from the Tryhards and Deke from the cEDH Nexus will be playing as well. In the Southern Division, you've got Flash Andretti from the RCEDH Discord, Helenium from the Spell Seekers, Hokey Rules, who I feel like might as well be from the Spell Seekers, but he's the resident Godo player, and Infinite IMOC will be over there as well. In the Eastern Conference, like we said, is Pontus, Plan, Pongo, and Coinman over there in the Eastern North Division. Northeast Division is... have you seen this rundown yet, Cobble?
No, I have not.
Okay, so the Northeast Division is Lurker, Ian, Comedian MTG, Scoots, and Spleenface.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that going to be a division?
Gonna be amazing.
Yeah. The Atlantic Division is Rebel, Kai from the Spellseekers, Braden from the cEDH cast, and Charles, our own Charles, Mono White guy, is going to be in the Atlantic Division. And then in the Central Division is Sick Robot, Devante from the Reflecting Pool, Timmy T100, and Squirrel Mob is going to be that Central Division. So wow. We've got some big names, some people who, are blasts from the past, some vets, some newer guys. But I'm really excited for this. I think it's going to be so much fun.
It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it.
Well, that about wraps things up for us here today. Just a quick reminder that you can follow us on Twitter at SculptyBoys, or you can find a direct link in our link tree in the description below. Want to also give an extra thanks to all of our patrons who help keep the lights on. If you too would like to become a patron, you can head on over to patreon.com/themindsculptors or check out the link in the description. Thank you again for joining us this week, and from all of us here at The Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.